Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Optimal Wealth Podcast, where we discuss creating passive income through real estate. Our mission is to help educate investors on how to grow wealth and invest passively. My name is Jarod Alexander, and I am a passive investor, currently in 6 syndications as a limited partner. I am also the founder of Optimal Equity Group, which is a real estate investment firm that was created primarily to help educate the passive investor. We do that in a couple of different ways. One is we provide education to help give you the confidence to get into the passive investing space. And two, each episode we will interview amazing guests that explore the strategies, insights, and secrets used by successful investors. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just starting out on your real estate journey, this podcast is designed to help give you the confidence and knowledge you need to make informed and profitable decisions. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Optimal Wealth Podcast. My name is Jarod Alexander, and I am your host. And today I am super excited to have our guest today on the show, Chris Larsen. Chris, welcome to the show.
Jarod, thanks for having me here today.
Well, thanks for being here. And, Chris is actually currently living, in Asheville, North Carolina, right, Chris?
That's right. 16 years, Jarod.
16 years. Nice. Well, we definitely, can relate to you there. I'm originally from Fayetteville, North Carolina. So I know it's beautiful country up there. What's the weather over there?
Absolutely.
Right.
Oh man, it's been, we're punching out of some rain here. So we get beautiful, rainy days. And then it turns into just it's gorgeous and lush right now here in late May. And in June, the pollen slows down, and June's my favorite time of the year, man. The weather's perfect. It's all green. It's a great time to be outside here in Asheville.
Yeah, absolutely. Up there in the mountains there.
That's right.
Well, cool, Chris. Well, let's go a little bit about, into your background here. So Chris is the founder and principal of the Next Level Income. Since retiring after 18 years in the medical device industry, he now dedicates himself to guiding others to financial independence through education and strategic investments. So with over 20 years of real estate expertise, Chris began his journey at 21, acquiring his first single-family rental, pursuing degrees in biomechanical engineering and finance at Virginia Tech. And since then, he's navigated diverse real estate ventures from development and private lending to syndicating over $1.5 billion in commercial properties since 2016. So again, like we mentioned, based in Asheville, North Carolina, where he's got his wife and 2 boys and loves the outdoors and the rich food and culture of the region. I agree with you there, Chris, and embodies the next level style where financial freedom meets adventure on the path to success. So,
that's
wow,
right.
What a mouthful there, man. And if you could, let's dive into, a little bit about your background. I mean, you started out when you were 21 years old buying single family. So, walk us through your journey, how you decided to get into real estate and where you're at today.
Yeah. Well, Jarod, thank you for the intro there. And the story and a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today, if you're listening today and you want a copy, you can get a copy of my book. I dive into all that at nextlevelincome.com. Get a free copy. We'll even send you a hard copy to your home if you put your address in there. But yeah, I started at 21, Jarod, and I was still in college. I was at Virginia Tech. I was still my undergrad degree when I bought that first property. But when I started college, my dream was to be a professional cyclist. But that dream kind of got derailed. I won't say it got derailed. I had a bit of an epiphany after my freshman year. My best friend, who was a year behind me in school, so he was also coming to Virginia Tech. We were set to be roommates. We were teammates. We were training partners. His name was also Chris. He had a massive brain hemorrhage. He passed away June 21st, 1997. And it was ironically, it's the longest day of the year. It was the longest day of my life at the time. And I'll never forget, I was up in Pennsylvania when it happened with him. And I continued racing that year. I raced another year, went back to school, raced another year. I was very successful. I ended up as a Category 1 cyclist, which for those of you that are listening that are familiar with the sport, once you're a Category 1 cyclist, you can be a pro. So you're basically a pro once you're a Cat 1. It's kind of like qualifying in golf or those sorts of endeavors. And my team actually did go pro the following year, but I quit. I walked away from the sport. And the reason is that I thought, like, this is, Jarod, this is kind of silly. Like, I'm riding my bike around in circles. There's more to life than just training and racing my bike. I got a lot out of the sport. I feel like I got everything that the sport provides, aside from, that moniker of being pro. And when I went back to school, I said, you know what? I want to live life without any regrets. And if you want to live life without regrets, one of the things you have to have are financial resources. Like, we can say, oh, money doesn't make you happy, but it certainly makes life easier to live. And I said, okay, if I don't want to have regrets in life, I want to have freedom. And I went through this process of determining what's going to give me freedom. And there's a reason we call it financial independence, financial freedom, because if you have enough money to live your life from day to day and pay for the things that you want in life, then you have a lot more freedom than somebody who doesn't. And as I studied different financial options to become financially independent, I looked at the stock market first. I was day trading in the stock market. I was doing well. I was making like $5,000 a month as a junior in college, but it was very stressful. And one night, laying there at 3 a.m. after not being able to sleep all night, I thought, like, this is silly. I'm 20 years old. Like, I don't even know if I'm going to make it to 40 if I keep living like this. So I continued to find other options with respect to investments. I read over 250 books. I went from an engineering degree to an MBA in finance, almost got my PhD in finance. And what I ultimately decided on was real estate was going to be my vehicle, Jarod, for financial independence. And that's what led me to buy that first property as a 21-year-old.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. You had that aha moment, at 21 years old, Chris, and just was, able to start that journey. And, it's interesting, these life events, how they really rock our world, in a way that really makes us evaluate, man, life's too short to just get a 9 to 5, retire, put money in a 401k, and hopefully we have enough to retire at 60, 65 years old. Right.
Absolutely.
And because, like you said, I know I've had a lot of, unfortunately have had some friends that, are no longer with us, same age as me. Right. And you just never know what tomorrow may bring or may not bring.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. With that, Chris, let's dive into, because I'm glad you referenced your book, at the beginning, because I actually, I read through this book actually before we did this podcast, and I love how you spelled out, for one, your story, but two, for the somebody just getting into this space. First they say get your own house in order, right?
That's right. That's right.
Take care of yourself, take care of your finances, get yourself in a position to be able to invest and start letting your money work for you, right? So, like example, get out of debt, right? They call it good debt versus bad debt, all bad, credit card debt, car loans, things like that, things that aren't making you money, right?
That's right.
Get those cleared up. And then, the good debt is real estate, things that are appreciating in life, or, and again, it could be real estate, or there's a lot of other, vehicles you can go down as well. But so with that, let's talk about the three buckets, right? So we've established your why, right?
Yep.
And you got what you talk about in the book called the safe bucket, the protect bucket, and the grow bucket. So if you could elaborate on those, explain to the listeners, what those are, and yeah.
Yeah. And there's a couple different things you can use for these, but first and foremost, you have to have what's essentially an emergency fund, right? So if something happens, if your income ceases, whether you're laid off or you're switching jobs, you're starting your own business, whatever it is, you want enough cash, enough money so that you can live ideally for, I'd say, 6 months to 2 years. For those of us that are business owners, that are entrepreneurs, you probably want it on the longer side, especially if you're a single earner in a household. Then you need, I'd say, 1 to 2 years at a minimum of living expenses set aside. That's just to make sure that you're safe. It's also, as my one of my college professors said, he would say, nuts, this is your nuts to you money. And he would say nuts to you like this. So, I think we can all figure out what nuts really meant. Nuts was another 4-letter word that he was being a gentleman in class and doing that. But if you have money, then if somebody tells you to do something you don't want to do, or you don't want to do that anymore, that's going to give you that ability to step back from that. But I think really it's to have a little bit of safety in terms of your income when it comes there. The second bucket is your protect bucket. So the safe bucket is, if you were laid off, if you choose to use a job, the protect bucket is going to be things like insurance. disability insurance, life insurance. We were talking before the show, Jarod. Not only did I lose my best friend, I lost my father when I was 5 years old, and the quote unquote estate was a mess after he passed away. He was a business owner and had 6 Corvettes. He collected Corvettes and rebuilt Corvettes. They were in various states of repair and rehab, essentially. So the whole estate was a bit of a mess, and it really was troubling for my mom. And it took a long time. It took a couple of years for us to kind of get out from underneath that and unwind that. And we lived very frugally during that time. So I really encourage you, especially if you're married, if you're a parent, it's really important to have things like disability insurance, life insurance. It's also important to have things like the proper estate plans. So when we talk about the next level income strategy, and we'll probably get to that, but we talk about making money, keeping your money, which is where this protect portion comes in, and then growing your money. So first off, you want to make sure that you have a safety net. Number 2, you want to have your life protected by insurance and proper estate and legal structures. And then number 3, you can look to grow that money. And once you're through those first 2, not real exciting, not real sexy, but that's when you put that money in that, what we call an opportunity fund, looking for investments that you can ultimately grow and create passive income for yourself.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, Chris. And thanks for spelling that out and walking us through that. And,
Yeah.
a couple questions come from that. So, if someone is, again, just getting started out in this space and kind of goes through this process, do you, because I struggle with this myself, right? As far as let's talk about financial advisors or fiduciaries, right? Which, the difference is a fiduciary has your best interest at hand, right? A financial advisor can just throw anything at you that, they make your money
big
off
difference.
of. Yeah, big difference. So, but with that said, of course, most financial and fiduciaries, the advisors there, definitely tailor more towards the stock market, right?
Absolutely.
So my question is, do you have a financial advisor that maybe understands real estate and what you do? And do you recommend people, get a financial advisor and fiduciary to help them grow, especially when they get to the third bucket? Help them grow that bucket there.
Yeah, good question. Personally, I don't use a financial advisor, but we do have several that actually refer us clients that understand what we do in terms of real estate, in terms of private investment options that are out there. And you make a good point, Jarod. So, when I was a rep, when I was a medical device rep, so I went from college, finished my MBA, and I went into the medical device field. And I was a salesperson. And for most of my career, for 10 years out of those 18 total, I worked for a company called Medtronic. It's the biggest medical device company out there. If I'm in a surgery and a surgeon says, "Hey, Chris, what do you have, or what would you recommend for this procedure?" Chances are I'm going to recommend a Medtronic product for a couple of reasons. 1, I should believe in my product if I work for that company. 2, that's what I get paid to sell. And 3, I'm contractually obligated to sell those products. And if I don't, I'll get fired. Well, the financial world is very similar. If you work for a financial company, if you're a quote unquote financial advisor, you're really a contractually obligated salesperson. So if you go to a financial advisor and say, "Hey, Jarod, what would you recommend for me?" That financial quote unquote advisor is going to most likely have to tell you only about those products that they sell through their company. And what's more, most financial advisors are prohibited from recommending anything else, and they're prohibited from actually investing in things other than what they can sell to their clients. Whereas a fiduciary, an RIA, a registered investment advisor, independent advisor, they have the capacity to charge typically a flat fee or a set percentage, but they don't have to sell you a bucket of goods. There are distributors, so there are other independent reps that would represent multiple different companies. Now, it's a little interesting because in the medical device world, typically the best products were sold by the biggest companies, whereas some of the smaller companies had distributors. Not always the case, but typically those big companies, they wanted basically a sole agreement with somebody if you sold it. An RIA is going to give you the capacity to talk to them and look at all kinds of different things. Mm-hmm. So I think the first thing that's most important, Jarod, is just like your health. You go to the doctor, You go to the doctor and say, hey, doctor, I want to be healthy. They're going to say, okay, great. Go eat healthy, exercise, do those things. I don't get paid to teach you how to stay healthy. I get paid to teach you to treat you if you're sick.
Yeah.
A surgeon, they don't teach you how to avoid surgery. They get paid to do surgery, to perform surgery. If you want to be healthy, you have to go understand what is healthy for your own body. And like I work with a personalized and concierge medical service where they actually help my wife, my family, and I stay healthy and do those things. But the first thing you need to do is take responsibility for yourself. So I think, before you go and you hire a financial advisor, learn about some of the basics when it comes to finances so you can speak that language and you can also understand, hey, this person, maybe they are trying to sell me something. Maybe they aren't. Maybe they're a registered investment, an RIA. Maybe they're not. But understanding the landscape is going to make a big difference. And then what I talk about in the book, Jarod, is learn how the rich invest. So it's probably not a surprise to most people that most quote unquote investment advisors, most financial professionals are geared towards the vast majority of people that are out there. They're worth maybe a couple million by the time that they retire, but those people are not working to be rich. If you plan to live off your 401k and Social Security when you retire, that's not really rich, right? What we teach are methods to drive passive income to be able to live independently, live a life of abundance well before you're 65, right? In your 30s, in your 40s, when you still have a lot of life in front of you and being able to do that. In these 401ks, those sorts of products that are out there, they're actually vehicles and they have heavy restrictions on when you can have access to that money. So if you say, hey, I'm comfortable, Chris, working till I'm 59 and a half, 65, whatever it may be. And, I'm okay like living off Social Security. I just read something this morning, Jarod. The average person that's retiring has less than $100,000 a year when they're going into retirement. That is not enough to live a life of abundance, in my opinion. So you have to do something different than the traditional financial world is going to teach you to do.
Yeah. No, great explanation there. And I love the analogy, you talked about, about the sales, I'm in sales as well, Chris. And
right.
When we get those emails, on a monthly or weekly basis, hey, we're promoting this, we're doing this, push this, right? And that's what we get paid. And they get spiffs and, incentives to push that product as well, right? So definitely makes sense, about the financial advisors, and it's not wrong. It's just the way it is, right?
Correct. And that's what's important, right? Yeah. So if you come and sell me a product and I know you're a salesperson, I'm not going to be surprised that you get paid to sell that product.
Right.
But if you don't understand that, then you might get confused. You might not realize that. So I think it's just important to understand how the money flows, how people are compensated. And that's a great question. Anyone you ask, you, me, financial advisor, say, hey, how are you compensated? Surgeon, doctor, who are you paid by? When you understand those motives, then a lot of times things make a lot more sense.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and kind of maybe a hot topic question, but what is your take on 401ks? So
I'm not a fan, and here's why. So if you look at the math, look, I'm an analytical guy. Okay, so if you look at the math, and I said, okay, Jarod, you're going to invest $10,000 a year, and you can either not pay tax and put it into a 401k, or you can pay tax and just invest it outside of a 401k. Are you going to have more money at the end of, let's say you start investing at $10,000 a year, up to 65, so 40 years total, and you either pay tax and invest it, or you don't pay tax and put it into a 401k. Both investment vehicles or both options are going to pay you 10%. At the end of 65 years, you pay tax on your 401k and take that money out, or you don't have to pay tax because you already paid tax on the other investment. What option is going to give you more money? Pay tax in the beginning or pay tax at the end? The answer is there's no difference.
There's no difference.
It's the same amount of money.
Right.
The difference is, what is your tax rate? So really, betting on a 401k is betting on lower taxes in the future because you're deferring the payment of taxes. So again, this goes back to our prior topic. Again, if you're like, well, Chris, I invest in my 401k, you're basically saying to me, I believe that one, either taxes are going to go down, which mathematically that's impossible. We actually need to raise taxes about 50% in this country to break even on expenses versus inflows. So we got to cut expenses in this country. That's the bottom line. We're not going to raise taxes 50%.
Right.
Or you believe that your personal tax rate is going to go down, which means either a combination of taxes going down or you're going to make less money. Now, if you say to me, Chris, do you want to be wealthier in the future? Do you want more income in the future or less income in the future? I'm going to vote for option one, more income. So again, if you put money into a 401k, you're basically saying, hey, I don't believe the math that's out there, or I'm going to be poorer in the future than I am today. And I don't like either of those options. So personally, I'm not a fan of qualified retirement plans like 401ks. I think there are better options out there. However, I will say there's a little bit of math that can change that. So the match that you get. So I was with the company at one point, I was getting an effective 10% match on my 401k contribution. So it can make sense in some of those ways to take that essentially free money and do that. And then I pulled money out of a 401k, out of a IRA during COVID when we got kind of a freebie to get money out tax-free. So there are some things out there that you can do, to take advantage of both scenarios. But in general, I'm not a huge fan of those qualified retirement plans.
Yeah, I tend to lean more with you, Chris, there. And what I would suggest to the listeners is sit down and with your employer, HR, or whoever, and walk through these numbers, right? See what's going to make the most sense. For me, once I discovered real estate, and most of the people listening to the show know I primarily focus on multifamily value add, right? I know Chris is very heavy in that space too. The aha moment for me was not only the compounding effect, the doubling of my money, right, in 3 to 5 years, but the depreciation that I can save, right, and limit my tax bracket, my taxable income, year over year. I mean, that's huge, right?
It is huge. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I like to say, if you're doing real estate right, if you're investing in real estate the right way, you're not paying taxes on the income that real estate is generating. Yeah. So that is something that typically you're not going to see in your quote unquote traditional investments. So, you're saying, hey, I'm going to leave my money in my 401k. I'm not going to have to pay income or taxes on that income I'm generating, but really you're actually not generating any income until you take that money out. And again, you have to wait till you're 59 and a half, or you pay a penalty. So you're paying a 10% penalty, plus you're paying taxes on that money that you're taking out. So that's why, again, it's in general, I don't think it's a good deal for most people. Whereas in real estate, you can buy real estate, you can get a tax benefit. You can get a tax benefit on the income that you're generating as well through something that's like a quote unquote phantom loss, which is depreciation. Yeah. And again, this is why I talk about, and I have on my book, the little monopoly pieces, because look, the IRS incentivizes certain investments and expenditures through the tax code. The tax code isn't there to penalize you. The tax code is there to incentivize you. And if you want to know how to use it, you just have to learn the rules. So I actually took a course when I was still in college by a former IRS agent, and he said, be aggressive with your deductions. Take advantage of all the deductions that are out there, but make sure you were documenting everything. Yeah. So, right, if I drive to visit a property like we did Friday, then I'm going to document those miles and make sure that I have that in there. And then the IRS says, hey, you drove to visit that property, you can deduct those miles. Where if I'm not tracking it, yeah, it's a deduction, but if I didn't track it, the IRS is going to disallow that typically unless I can prove that I did it. So it's very simple to follow that once you understand the rules typically.
Yeah. Well, and for listeners, I actually did another podcast. You might be familiar with Jim Pfeiffer, Chris.
Yeah, I know Jim. Yeah,
from left field. And he talks about, his CPA calls it the lazy 1031, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And it's just really deferring those losses until, these deals go what they call full cycle when they sell, which is when you get the big payout, and you can just take those losses against those gains and just kind of keep rinsing and repeating. Right.
That's right.
Because they never, you don't never lose them. Right. They just, they just keep, moving. So 3, 4, 5 years that you can apply those to the investment that does sell. And
That's
again,
right.
just keep recycling that.
Yeah,
So we're going to
absolutely.
switch gears, but check that out. Check that episode out. And it kind of dives into a little bit more of what Chris was just talking about there, about just that power of depreciation. I mean, yeah, we can do a whole podcast episode on that alone, Chris. And,
100%.
I want to share real quick too on, kind of touching off the growth bucket. There's some resources you referenced in the book here. The website, The Motley Fool, is a good one to go check out. And I actually was looking at this one, the retireearlyhomepage.com.
That
Right.
thing's old, man, but yeah, I used that in college. Absolutely.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
saw it, I even said on there at the front, he's like, after 20 years of posting, I'm running out of content. Right. He's like, just check it out, and
Yeah.
I've pretty much laid everything out for you. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of great resources just on that page. I just, scratched the surface on that. So, okay, I want to transition over into let's talk about infinite banking now, right?
Yeah, let's do it, man.
And for those that don't know, infinite banking is whole life insurance, right? Which
Yep.
I want you to start out before, because we don't know what we don't know, right? And we only know what we hear. And so what I was hearing when I first, kind of just growing up, was the Dave Ramsey, just get term, right? And you're dumb if you get whole life, right? Pretty much of Dave Ramsey's words. And so, but I think there's a different strategy around whole life. And so, Chris, with that said, help educate listeners first, what this strategy is, how it works, and walk us through why this would be a good resource and set us up to achieve this financial freedom we're talking about here.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's walk through a few different things, and then I want to put this in context that most of your listeners that understand real estate will appreciate, I think. But first off, we're actually recording a webinar tonight on exactly this topic. So you're going to miss it if you're listening to this, because we're recording it today, and I don't think we're going out here in time.
Yeah.
But check us out, nextlevelincome.com. We'll have a webinar under the banking link, so you can check out the webinar here, and we'll dive deep into it. And also, you can get a copy of this book, Money Insights for Sales Professionals, if you haven't gotten it yet. And if you have trouble finding it, just email me, chris@nextlevelincome.com, chris@nextlevelincome.com, and say, Chris, I want some more information and a copy of the book on infinite banking. But first off, you mentioned Dave Ramsey. So I think we already talked about kind of how the conventional wisdom is really wrong when it comes to financial independence in terms of qualified plans, right? You're betting on lower tax rates in the future, which is kind of a relic of, hey, we don't want you to be in poverty when you're 65 if you're still alive, because when a lot of these things like Social Security were put into place, the average life expectancy was 65, not 80, which it is approximately today. I want to live to be 122. I want to see the next century that starts. So, those types of things are not really going to help me. So that's number one. Number two, the traditional financial advisors, and I was taught this too when I worked for State Farm, is buy term, invest the difference. That shifted from whole life, or quote unquote traditional insurance, when managed mutual funds came into being. So if you think about it, like, the products that we put together in the insurance space, and I am a licensed insurance advisor, going back to, hey, understand the financial motivations, of the people you work with.
Mm-hmm.
But if you structure it properly, the fees are going to be less than 1% typically over the life of a policy. You compare that to a financial advisor and mutual funds, you may be looking at 1, 2, even 3% on an annual basis. So that's the next thing. The next point I'd like to make is the fact that if you look at the average returns of the average investor, they're low single digits in the stock market. And that's where the value of a financial advisor comes into place. So typically, if a financial advisor is competent, they're charging, say, 1%, they're going to earn the average investor back a multiple of that, typically 2, 3, even 4%, because they help them stick to the plan, much like a trainer when you go to the gym. That accountability counts for a lot. Contrast that, Jarod, to the fact that today, I'm getting an almost 6% tax-free rate of return in my policies. Think about that. Tax-free, 5.75, almost 6% rate of return in my policies. And guess what? they also have a guaranteed rate of return. Where do you hear that in the investment world?
Yeah, never.
You just don't.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I wouldn't talk about life insurance, specifically traditional whole life insurance, in terms of investment, because really it's a vehicle. It should be compared to something like a bank account, or like a traditional savings account, or CDs or something like that, because you have these guarantees. When there was the banking crisis here a little over a year ago, I didn't have to worry about it because most of my cash is in these policies. So those are a few.
So
Go
real
ahead.
quick, when you talk
Yeah.
about a guarantee, like, because that percentage, we're at 5.7% right now that you're getting tax free, right? That fluctuates, correct? Well,
Yeah, so it's the guaranteed base rate is 4%.
4%. Okay.
Yeah, 5.75 is actually historically very low because it lags. So over the past 20, 25 years, if you look, it's between it's closer to 7% actually, the average rate of return.
And that's just for your money sitting there collecting these gains at 6 to 7% tax free.
That's right. Yep.
Now, so like when you say that, it's like a no brainer. Why would I not put money in there?
Yeah. So first off, and I'll get to that here in a second, Jared.
Okay. Yeah.
So you mentioned like you'd be a dummy, effectively, right? I'm paraphrasing. You'd be a dummy to buy whole life insurance compared to buy term insurance.
Yeah.
Okay. That's like saying, well, you'd be a dummy to buy a house because it's cheaper to rent. It is. It's like 30% cheaper to rent. So am I a dummy for buying a house? Most people would say, well, no, Chris, it makes sense to buy a house because you build equity. Well, guess what? You build equity in a traditional life insurance policy. Buying a life insurance policy, a whole life insurance policy, is very similar to buying a house. Think about it. If I buy term and I rent, it's going to be cheaper today to buy term insurance for 1 year, right? But what happens in a year? The rate goes up. Now you're like, yeah, Chris, but rents are pretty low right now in terms of growth. They're only going to grow maybe a percent or two this year. Yeah, but remember a couple of years ago when they went up 20%? In Asheville, they went up like 25% multiple years.
Yeah.
Because there weren't enough apartments here for people to rent. Once you hit your 50s and 60s, that rate starts to go exponential and it never slows down. It gets to the point where it doesn't make sense to do that anymore. Compare that to traditional insurance. We structure our policies to be fully paid up in as little as 7 years. 7 years. You never have to make a payment again. That's like a 7-year mortgage. Now, if you pay your house up in 7 years, what happens? Even though you may not have put the full amount down, right? If you put $100,000 down on a house that's worth $500,000 and it goes up in value 10%, 500 to 550, that's $50,000 of growth on your original 100,000. It's the same thing in a traditional insurance policy. And just like a house, when it goes up in value, you can actually borrow. We don't take the money out of the policy, we actually borrow against it. So we use the equity, the cash value in the policies as equity that we borrow against. So what we teach is a strategy called the investment optimizer, where you put money into your insurance policy, you borrow against it in a reasonable way, and then you can use that money to invest. So this is why we say you can have your cake and eat it too. You can do both. You can have a multi-million-dollar insurance policy, and you can have access to the cash to invest in other places. And if you do it and you blend the two together like we structure them, effectively these insurance policies do pay for themselves over time.
So let me ask you a question on that. So when you borrow against that money, right? Mm-hmm. So what's, because my understanding was I've heard that you can borrow against it, still earn interest on that money.
Yep.
And then not only, and obviously you're investing in probably real estate or something that's going to make you money, hopefully, right? You don't want to be just taking it out for no reason.
That's right. Don't go buy a boat.
Yeah.
That's not, I mean, you can, but that's not, that's not kind of the methodology that we teach.
Right. So what is that? So do you have to pay like interest on the money you borrow? And,
yes.
And okay, but it's still, so say if the rate is, you're paying interest on 4%, right? Mm-hmm. The interest rate is 4% of that money you take out. Say, are you still getting that 6%? So you're making 2% on that money. Am I following you there?
So that's in a simple way. That's a great way to describe it, Jared. So let's say like right now I can borrow out of my life insurance policy around 5%. So if you borrow, so let's say your house is worth $500,000 and now it's gone up in value to 100,000, over several years. So you say, well, I'm going to borrow $100,000 in equity, right? And now home equity lines of credit are actually more expensive right now than life insurance loans. But let's say you borrow out at 5%. Do you still get the appreciation on your house, even though you borrowed that money out?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. Your house still goes up in value. They don't say, well, Jarod, your house was worth $1 million. You borrowed 100,000. We're only going to appreciate your home on the 900,000 of equity you have in your house now, or value, not the million. No, it's the exact same way in life insurance. Because remember, we're not actually taking the money out. We're using it as collateral, and we're actually borrowing from the general fund. Now, here's what's cool. We know this, and if you're an investor or you're a real estate investor, we understand leverage, which I was just talking about, but we also understand compound interest. So if you borrow at 5% and you pay that loan back, you're paying straight line interest. If the money in there is still compounding at 5%, it's compounding on itself. So it's compounding at 5%. So if I said to you, Jarod, you can borrow $100,000 at 5% and pay it back at 5%, but I'm going to let you keep the compounding interest on that original 100,000 while you pay it back. Would you take that deal?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All day long. That's exactly how this works. So what I hear when people say, "Oh, you shouldn't do that." So you shouldn't get life insurance if you don't have an insurable interest. So look, if you're a single guy, independently wealthy, like what's the point in paying for the cost of insurance if you don't have a family to take care of if something happens to you? Right. So that's number one. And I've talked to those people. They love the concept, but they don't really have an insurable interest. Yeah. Two, you're too old, you're not healthy enough, and the insurance costs too much. But you can use this strategy with a policy on another insured. So that can negate that as well. The other one is getting a policy where the premiums aren't affordable to you. So what we typically do, if somebody says, "Hey, I want a premium that's going to be, say, $100,000 a year, I can afford that," maybe make it $50,000 a year. Now, people might be like, "Chris, that's insane, a $100,000 premium." But remember, the money's going in and coming back out. So if you're investing $100,000 annually into real estate, why not put that money through a life insurance policy first? Now, I'll answer that question. Because you have to pay for the insurance. But the way we structure these policies, Jarod, the premiums, the first 2 years, you're going to pay almost all, if not 100%, of the fees in those first 2 years. So we can go in with an investor and we can say, "Hey, look, this is how much it's going to cost you those first 2 years. So by year 3, if you put $1 into the policy, you can take $1 out, and you're going to actually get more than $1 of value inside of the policy from that growth." So again, we've heard these things. It's conventional wisdom, like, "Oh, low-fat diets are healthier than high-fat diets." We now know that the sugar industry lobbied the FDA heavily decades ago, and we know that sugar kills you, right? Sugar's poison in the body. "Oh, you should put money into qualified retirement plans." Well, I just explained that only works if you plan to be poorer or taxes go down in the future. Then we have another one of these fallacies, right? "Oh, buy term and invest the difference." Well, the wealthiest families don't do that. And why? Because of what I said. It's basically akin to saying, "Hey, I'm just going to rent for the rest of my life, and God help me, I don't have to pay unaffordable rents when I can't afford it the most when I'm older." We want to front load these expenses when our income is most predictable. And then guess what? The benefit of these policies, it's a private contract, Jarod. So they have typically similar protections in states like your home, like your homestead exemption in areas. It's private. So no one knows what the value is of my life insurance policies or how much cash I have in those, and you can keep those. And then you can also stack these in a trust, and you can have this waterfall where you can have an insurance policy benefits, buy insurance on future generations, and you can create 9-figure windfalls for your heirs very rapidly.
Yeah. So if it's private, say if, God forbid, somebody tries to sue you on one of the investment properties, like they can't come after that, right? Because that's protected.
And it depends state by state, but yes, most states like North Carolina has significant protections around things like life insurance. Yes.
Well, so let me ask this, and the listener may be thinking the same thing. So if someone and I shouldn't say only, but makes $100,000 to $150,000 per year, right? And doesn't have $100,000 to invest annually. Maybe they have 5, 10, 15, right?
Yep.
What do you tell those people? Should they still get into whole life and just start out with that 5 grand, or should they, keep, investing in that grow bucket and until they get to a higher number and then an income back? Because they might, I would assume, with these front loaded costs on the fees and stuff, that's really going to deplete that capital. Or is it based on a percentage of capital, or how does that work?
Yep. Great question. So there's a point where it becomes more efficient the higher your premiums are, because you're paying for the base insurance rate that you want, and then we actually add what are called paid up addition riders. But here's the thing: my wife and I started these policies 15 years ago when we found out she was pregnant with our first son, and we started these policies. I talk about it on my website. If you go to the blog and look for the blog post that says "How to Pay for College Without a 529 Plan," Part 2. And I talk about our story, which was basically, hey, instead of putting, say, $600 a month into a 529 plan, you could put into a life insurance policy and have a guaranteed amount of money for your children. And then they're not going to be penalized for having that money in a 529 plan when they get to college in terms of scholarships and those sorts of things. Or maybe they don't want to go to college. How nice would it be to offer your child, like my friend's son, who said, hey, I'm going to do an apprenticeship, Dad. Well, he's doing an HVAC apprenticeship. What if you could say, hey, son, I'll lend you this $100,000 instead of going to college to start your own business, right? You have a lot of flexibility that you can do for that. And Jarod, my wife and I, we started contributing $3,000 a month about 15 years ago. So these policies typically start to work around $10,000 a year of premium. But the nice thing is, like, you can actually make them very flexible. So you could put in, say, as little as $10,000 a year, or you could put in $50,000 to $100,000 a year in that same policy, depending on your age and your rating and those sorts of things. But you can look at it a few different ways. So if you don't want to go all in like we do with the investment optimizer strategy, you could start off and say, hey, I'm just going to start a policy so I have, say, a guaranteed amount of money for my kids. It's essentially also like a private pension fund. So if you're a business owner, this is a really great way to give you a really good base for your retirement. If you don't have like that company match like you get, you could say, hey, I'm going to put money in this policy. By the way, that money you had for your emergency fund, like we talked about earlier. So if you have $100K in your emergency fund, why not stash that in your life insurance, earning 5.75% tax free? You can do that with these policies as well. So if you're quote unquote only making $150,000 a year, you're making $150,000 a year. That same person probably has $50,000 to $100,000 sitting aside in a fund, like a rainy day or an emergency fund. But you can use that and store it in your life insurance policy as well.
Well, so and this is we'll wrap up with this, but we'll kind of use this as maybe a live call here, probably how you would talk to somebody, because I'll use myself as an example here. So for me now, Chris, like I invest in apartments, right? So most of my money, whenever it comes in, I have my emergency fund, and most of that other money, I get it out into investments right away, right? I want that money working for me. So, but I do have this brokerage account, right? So typically, like every time I get paid, I use that method, pay myself first. So it's just set up automatically 2 or 3 times a month. This money's going into this brokerage account. Right now, I probably got, I just depleted most of it. So I'm only probably right around 10 grand, right, in this brokerage account. Would you recommend that I would just go ahead and take that, put it into, because I'm thinking about just throwing that into something that's getting 8-10%. I just found this, debt lending fund that, hey, why not? But I could take that, put it into the whole life, right? And then I can borrow a certain amount of that, and let me know if I'm tracking right. Borrow a certain amount of that and put it into something that's earning maybe a little higher percentage than the 5%. Is that something you would recommend? And for like my case, and maybe this might help the listeners with where they're at too. But yeah. So let me explain kind of how we used our policies in the same exact scenario, Jarod. Okay.
So we started our policies. We let that cash value build for several years. We kind of just used that as the fixed income portion of our portfolio, as our emergency fund. And once we got up to say 100,000 in value, because remember, it was serving a couple different purposes. Right. And we said, hey, let's say I want to take 50,000 of that 100,000 and put it into an investment. But I know, I'm a salesperson, I'm successful, I'm going to get bonuses throughout the year. So let's say I make $50,000 base, and then my bonuses are, let's say, let me flip this around a little bit. Let's say I make 100,000 base, and my bonuses are going to add up to 50,000. Okay, to keep the numbers the same, and we'll just say after tax, just because we don't want to get too complex. So I live off my 100. I don't count on my bonuses. I invest my bonuses. So I take that 50,000 out of my insurance policy, out of the cash value of my insurance policy. I invest it in a syndication, and then as my bonuses come in, I repay that loan. So now I'm back up to $100,000. But actually, because I'm getting 5.75% of my policy, I've repaid that loan. I now have almost $106,000 in my policy, right? Got to pay a little bit of interest back. But remember, I'm getting income from that investment I just made with the $50,000. So I'm easily making the payments on that interest. Because let's say I'm getting 6, 7, 8% on that investment. So I'm able to pay that back. So that's what we did. We had that cash value in there that we were using for college, for an emergency fund to build up. And then we started to peel off some of that cash value, put it into an investment. And then when that money came back, either through bonuses or when the investment sold, we used to build spec houses and do the same thing. Buy a lot for $50,000, build a house, have $100,000 come back to us, pay off the $50,000, put the additional $50,000 in the policy. Now I got, instead of $100,000 in my policy, I got $150,000 because I had room in there to do that. So it's a way where you kind of keep that wheel going. And then here's the other thing. You don't feel pressure to invest it because it's sitting in a low yield savings account, because you're getting that 5.75 tax free in your policy. So you don't go and make rash investment decisions because of that. There's no pressure to do it. And frankly, sometimes the investment landscape isn't awesome and you don't want to make an investment at that point. And then as you get towards retirement, you can convert that cash value. So let's say you built up $1 million in cash value. You can now take all of that million tax free, and you can continue to take loans on any value above that it's grown to. So let's say it's grown to 2 million, but you have a $5 million policy. You can take all 2 million out tax free. When you pass away, when you move on, that 5 million, 2 million will go to pay off all those loans, and your heirs will still get that 3 million. So it's a way that a business owner, that a high income professional, again, can build that essentially a private pension plan that has a lot more flexibility than a qualified plan, and a lot more security, and it's a lot more private than a bank account, for instance.
Yeah. And do you have so your emergency fund, I would imagine, is probably in this whole life, right? You probably just use that as the stash all the money earning.
Yeah, because if I'm an entrepreneur and I got a family of 4, I just read you need like $170,000 a year to live the quote unquote American dream. So right, for the average person that's doing pretty well, you're going to have for 2 years of expenses. That's say $300,000. That's a lot of money to be sitting there not doing much. In a quote unquote secure place for your emergency fund. I'd much rather have that housed in my life insurance in case I need it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, great stuff, Chris. Yeah, thanks for walking through that. I would
Absolutely.
A little bit more time, but I'm glad I'm, as you can tell, very interested in this, and I've been learning a lot about it, these past few years. And, I'll be honest, it's one of those things that it sounds too good to be true. At least that's what I thought initially, right? It's like, why wouldn't everybody do this? But
there's a couple reasons real quick, because I know we're wrapping up on time. Yeah. So one, there is an upfront cost to it.
Right.
So you can't just throw your money in and not stick to it. Right. Mm-hmm. It's like a workout plan. If you just go to the gym for a couple of weeks, you're not going to get fit. You got to keep going. Yeah. So you got to be able to stick with it for about 7 years. So that's number one. And it can be a little daunting for certain people. Number two, the advisors around these policies, you actually get paid less to structure these policies than a traditional policy, because the commissions go down. So that's one of the secrets. You have to work with an advisor that can drive the cost of the insurance down, which also drives their commission down. So most advisors, if you say, hey, Jarod, we got this great product you can sell to your customers, but oh, by the way, you're going to get paid a third of what you get paid your regular product. Do you want to sell that? Yes or no? You're going to be like, well, yeah. And oh, by the way, it's way more complicated to tell your customer about. How does it sound? As a salesperson, you're like, well, wait a minute. Why would I want to sell something that's way more complicated? I got to explain to my clients how to use it. And oh, by the way, I get paid a lot less. Like, why would I do that? So you have to go to the right person that understands it. We added it as a value add to our business and what we do. And if you're listening and you want to take a look, we're happy to structure or set up a time to look at a structure and explain that to you. And again, Jarod, I'll make sure you get a copy of this as well, Money Insights for Sales Professionals.
Yeah.
But again, it's something that I personally have been doing for 15 years. And I got licensed during COVID when I have some downtime, so I could take a more active role with my clients that are interested in doing this. But again, there is a cost to it. It does have to be structured properly, and you want to be able to stick with it for 5 to 7 years. Otherwise, it might not be a good fit for you.
Yeah. Well, and then with that said, for the listeners, is definitely, you've heard us talk about us on this podcast before. Sit down, determine your goals, right? What are you looking to achieve? And if this is something that does make sense, get with someone like Chris or someone that understands this concept, that maybe invest in them like Chris. I mean, he obviously invests in real estate himself, as in syndications. I mean, we fill out a form here, when we sign up for these podcasts, and he's done over, 4,000 doors, 10 self-storage facilities, right? 800 mobile home, park lots, 31 car. Like, Chris understands the concept of this. So make sure, someone, definitely has your best interest at hand, isn't just because there's different types of whole life too, right? And I don't want to get into
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Make sure, you understand this. And I'll kind of bring this back to apartment syndications. That's honestly, Chris, why I started my business, right? Yeah. I did a handful of deals, probably 5 or 6 deals. And I'm like, everybody should know about this, right? Like, and it kind of, when you talk to people, it sounds too good to be true. Double your money in 3 to 5 years. You pay little to no taxes. You get cash flow in between. Like, why am I invested in the stock market if I can make money there? Well, let me educate you here. But it does take money to get started too. You can't just walk in there with $5,000. You gotta build up some money. Now, again, there are actually ways you can invest $5,000, $10,000, but to really start generating some wealth, it takes a little more, a little bit more chunk of money there. So
absolutely. Well, yeah, and hey, look, Jarod, I appreciate the opportunity to explain it thoroughly here, which we don't always get to do. But again, if you want to learn more, nextlevelincome.com/banking, or click on the banking link. And we're certainly happy to talk to you if you have interest. Go through it, and we're transparent with how much it costs. Even if you have other policies and you've talked to other advisors and look at them, you want, basically a second opinion and to compare and contrast, because we have the opportunity to work with a bunch of different insurance providers to make sure that we have the one that's optimized for what you're looking to do.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Yeah. Highly encourage y'all to check that out and get with Chris on that. I know we'll probably be setting up a call here in the near future, Chris, about that. So, all right, well, let's go into, we got just a few minutes here, so we'll kind of run through this, but I want to touch on the fire round is what I like to call it.
Let's do it, man.
Because, with all this real estate stuff, we got to take care of ourselves mentally. We're going to talk about morning routines here. But, first, if you could get the listeners, a book you recommend on real estate, and then another book you recommend on, mindset that, really just helps you cultivate a positive attitude towards what you're doing here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So real estate, I got a special one for the audience here today. It's called The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking, The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking by Philip Anderson. It talks about the 18.6-year real estate cycle that I also talk about in episode 100 of my podcast, which you can find on the website. In terms of health, I'm big on health. I'm big on mindset. I think it's super important. There's a lot of great ones out there. There's a book called Lifespan by David Sinclair. Lifespan by David Sinclair. And David Sinclair talks about how aging is not inevitable. It is a reversible disease. And he talks about a bunch of different strategies that you can utilize to help reverse your age, to live longer. And that's the big thing, Jarod. Money's great, but if you can have more years to enjoy it, how much better is that?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, great books. I'm jotting those down as you're saying them, Chris. We'll put them in the show notes for sure, and I'll be checking those out as well. And, if you, question number 2, if you could share a specific goal or dream that holds specific significance to you?
Yeah. Wow. A special
Getting deep
goal
here a
or
little
dream.
bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I've certainly achieved some, but my big focus right now is, and the dream I have is to spend as much time with my young boys. They're 12 and 14. And, my dream is to be able to say yes when my sons need me. So I tell them three things every day. I love you. I'm proud of you, and I got your back. And I want to be able to have the freedom, the financial resources, to be able to have their back when they need it the most.
Yeah, real quick. I love that answer, Chris. And, for me, I didn't lose my dad, at 5 years old. So I can't imagine how, tough that could have been having a 5-year-old myself right now.
Yeah.
And, I'm sorry to hear about that. I just grew up without a dad, right? I never met him, always wondered, right? And so for me, it was like, I'm going to be the father I never had,
Love
right?
that.
And exactly what you just ran through, those three things, is just being present. And it's easy, and I'll share, it's easy to get sidetracked and busy with all this stuff we do, right? And be on our phones. I mean, everything's through that mobile device now. It's just like, I'm working on putting that phone away, being present with those kids, and just spending the quality time with them. Because that's why we're doing this. Money is just
Exactly.
an object to help us get it where we want to go, right? But
That's exactly
the real
right.
meaning in life is
100%.
our family, right? Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So, all right. And then question number 3, how do you structure your day to maintain a healthy work-life balance? Do you have a morning routine you can share?
Yeah. Yeah. So real quick for your audience, because I know we're running out of time here, to structure your day and your life to get the most out of it. Number 1, put down your non-negotiables, your sleep, your workouts, your time with your family. Put that on your calendar first, including your days off that you're going to have for the year. That's one of my favorite things to do around New Year's every year, is to put all my travel vacations in the year. Then put the things that are going to move your needle the most. And then everything else falls after that. So what I love to do is I love to get up at 5 o'clock. I get a little cup of coffee. I meditate for 15 to 20 minutes. And then I get to work for an hour, hour and a half on the thing that's going to move the needle the most for me.
Love it. Love it. Do you cold plunge?
I did this morning. Absolutely.
Yeah, me too. I just got mine in a few days ago, and
My man, I love it. I love it.
Love it.
Yeah, my friend actually, real quick, is he has a company called Chili Dip, and he's coming out with a very affordable inflatable version. If you want to check it out, email me, chris@nextlevelincome.com. Just say, hey, I want information on the Chili Dip. I'm happy to put you in touch with my friend who's got those. It's a really cool product.
That's awesome. I wish I would have known about that, Chris, because I put it as an investment, right? But
it is an investment. Yeah. They're not cheap.
Yeah, but look at the benefits. It's right. What are you willing to invest in your health, right? I mean,
absolutely.
There's tons of benefits.
It's better than a cup of coffee to wake up. I'll tell you that, man.
Yep. Well, let's wrap up. Last and final question: what is one thing you want to be remembered for?
Geez, well, I would love. Look, if my boys can say I'm proud of my father, then I'm going to be a happy man. So, and I think that's great. If you have kids and you're facing a decision, personally, whatever it is, look in the mirror and say, hey, would my kids be proud of me? If they knew the reasons behind this decision. So I want to make as big of an impact with people in terms of financial education. And that's what drives us. That's our mission here at Next Level Income. But I want my boys to be proud of me. And I try to live my life every day so that is the case.
Love it, Chris. Well, man, thanks, again for coming on the show today. Really enjoyed our conversation. Hopefully this was helpful to the listeners. I know I'm going to go back and re-listen to it, and there's, I think, a lot of great information packed in here. And if you could one more time, tell listeners where they can connect with you, and if they want to learn more about like the infinite banking and Next Level Income.
Yeah, absolutely, Jarod. Thanks again. Thanks for having me on here. Thanks for what you're doing for your listeners here. Check us out at nextlevelincome.com. You can subscribe to our podcast, get access to the information that we talked about with the life insurance at the banking link. You get a free copy of our book. And if you're interested in learning more about the investments that we have in terms of multifamily, self-storage, mobile home parks, and car washes, click on the invest link to schedule a time with our team to learn more.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Jarod.
Thank you for listening to the Optimal Wealth Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and pay it forward by sharing with a friend. Most importantly, be sure to optimize your results and take massive action on what you have learned here today. For more, visit optimalequitygroup.com.